That would be great. All right, so we have the recording turned on. All right, Marie, any comments before we get started?
Nope, just Ms. Trott said good morning to everyone.
Good morning. Thank you for being here. My name is Laura Hopkins, and I am the Electronic and Information Resources Accessibility Coordinator at UT Arlington. And this presentation is the presentation that I share with campus when I want to tell people what EIR accessibility is and how we address it on our campus. I will share this entire PowerPoint presentation file with you as soon as the session is over. So I am not going to read all of the text that are on all of the slides to you, but it is information that I wanted you to have. So there is a slide that tells you a little bit about me and my background. My pronouns are she, her. I am wearing a black blouse with a UT Arlington blue lace jacket, trying to support my school colors. I always include a slide in my PowerPoint file when I'm sharing it so that if someone that uses JAWS receives the file, they understand that there is text in the notes section and how to access that text. And I do have an agenda for today. These are the points that we are going to cover. So let's jump right in. What does it mean to be accessible? Well, it means equal access, right? Giving everyone the same information, including those that have disabilities. I believe that we all, no matter what our agency is, have goals for being diverse and inclusive, right? We have DEI goals. When it comes to serving those that have disabilities, part of DEI is also being accessible because we can't be diverse if we're not accessible, right? Because we would leave everyone that has disabilities out of the equation. So being accessible is a bedrock to being diverse and being inclusive. Let me advance my slide. This is a graphic that we have seen for years in the accessibility world. And it's trying to display that giving everyone the same accommodation is not successful to everyone. And even if you can give everyone the accommodation that they need to be successful, that's not the real goal. The ultimate goal is to not need accommodations, that we are accessible. So it doesn't matter if you can't see or can't hear or can't use a mouse or, whatever the disability may be, we want our electronic resources to be accessible to you. When you look at this next photograph, it's a picture of a gentleman sitting in a wheelchair at the top of some stairs. Used to, when the world used the medical model to talk about what is a disability, you would look at this photograph and say, well, the disability is the fact that this person is in a wheelchair or the fact that the wheelchair is present. And that is something that we have moved away from to a social model. The issue here, the problem is not the wheelchair. The problem are the stairs, right? If this was a ramp instead of stairs, there wouldn't be an issue. So the problem is not the fact that the person is in a wheelchair. The problem is that we as a society have created barriers for that portion of our population. Slide Improve says that disability is a mismatch between a person's abilities and their environment. There's a great deal of truth to that if we will simply create an accessible environment, whether it's our PowerPoint files, our emails, our websites, our software, then the disabilities won't matter. There won't be a mismatch. Any questions before I move on?
I don't see anything in the chat.
Okay, thank you. So again, I'm not going to read these presentation files to you, but I just want you to have a basic understanding that there's lots of different types of disabilities. The current estimate is that 25% of the population has some type of a disability. Here's the statistic that I find fascinating. 100%. Okay, right, that means you and me too, right? 100% of people are expected to have a disability, at least temporarily, at some point in their lives. Maybe you've had eye surgery, so you have a patch on your eye. Maybe you have an ear infection and you can't hear. Maybe you break your hand and you can't use a mouse. So that really drives home that being accessible is important. If you're in the accessibility profession like I am, you may have people often say to you, well, I don't have anyone with a disability on my team, in my department, in my class, whatever the situation is. And the way I respond to that is, well, you don't today, but no one knows what tomorrow brings, right? And if we are being successful in our goal to be diverse and inclusive, we will have teammates that have blindness, that have deafness, that can't use the mouse, whatever the disability may be. And that's the goal. So we all need to take steps to be accessible now so that as our co-workers' experiences and situations expand, no one's going to run into any issues. When you receive this PowerPoint file, there's a list of assistive technologies that are used for each types of these disabilities on the slide. You're welcome to review. Okay, who benefits from accessible design? Well, people that have disabilities, for one, but also everyone. Think about the curb cuts in the sidewalks, right? That was put in so that people in wheelchairs could have access on and off the sidewalk. And it was a huge success. But it also helped the elderly. It helped people with walkers. It helped little kids, right? It helped lots of people. It helps all of us, even though that may not have been the original intent. So it is an important concept to understand that being accessible is not only a benefit to those with disabilities. So when we're talking about EIR accessibility, some people want to know why. Why do we need to be accessible? And there's two reasons. One, because we care, right? We want to be accessible. We want to have an inclusive and diverse workforce and to serve our clients, our customers, our students that have disabilities. We want them to not encounter any barriers when they visit us, whether it's your state agency or our campus. The second reason we need to be accessible is because it's the law. All right, there's just no way around it. It's the law. You have to be accessible. And when it comes to higher ed, as a public institution, there's lots of laws. And I'm not going to read these all to you, but they're here on this list if you'd like to see them. Does the law have teeth? Yes. All right. So if you are choosing to not be accessible or to ignore it, which means that you're probably not being accessible, you are creating risk for your agency. And this slide is particular to higher ed. You will get sued, all right? And you will lose because it's the law. All right. When COVID hit March 2020, and lots of schools and agencies went remote, the number of lawsuits rose drastically. They rose, according to the Wall Street Journal, 64% in the first half of 2021 over 2020. And then the expected case counts for 2021 was expected to reach 4,000. In particular, you might be interested, this article about 50 colleges being sued. This was a person that lived in New York State. And he had tried to register for a college class and couldn't because it wasn't accessible, and he got mad. He got tired of it. So he picked an institution of higher education from every state that had an inaccessible website and sued them. Now, I don't know why, but he decided to sue only private institutions. So in Texas, he sued SMU. And that settlement was confidential, so I don't know how it turned out. But I'm not certain why he didn't sue public institutions, because by law, we are required to be accessible. Okay, for higher ed, the TAC 213.41 requires that there will be an EIR Accessibility Coordinator, and that person shall be organizationally placed to facilitate institution-wide accessibility compliance. Now, I did not learn this until this morning, that the TAC for other state agencies is different. Okay, so if you're an EIRAC for higher ed, your requirement is compliance. But if you're an EIRAC for other state agencies, your requirement is to ensure progress. Now, I found that very surprising that the higher ed TAC rule requires us to ensure compliance, whereas all of the other state agencies, you are trying to facilitate progress. That is certainly a different standard, and I thought that that was important to mention. Marie, do we have any comments or questions?
It says, Cindy's asking what would be in the difference? And I'm actually pulling up the TAC because I wanted to see what you're citing here.
So 213.21 are the other state agencies where you are required to facilitate progress. So progress is just getting better, right? But for higher ed, where we are supposed to facilitate compliance, we're supposed to already be at 2.0 A/AA, right? The fact that I can show progress doesn't get me to compliance. I have to actually reach compliance. I think that's the difference. And I'm sorry if I didn't say that very clearly. Let's see. Okay, so let's define EIR. So if you are just introducing people at your agency or on your campus to electronic and information resources, it's important to have a definition. This is the definition from TAC, and I'm sorry, but no one's going to stay with you, okay? And it took me several months to come up with the definition that I use here at UTA. I like to put it in 4 buckets. So it's websites. If you put it online, it's EIR, okay? Number 2, it's software, and that includes software as a service. So your SurveyMonkey and your MailChimp, you know, it's an online software, it's a service, that's EIR. The 3rd bucket is anything that's electronic. So if it takes a device, it could be a smartphone, it could be a tablet, an iPad, a computer. This is going to include your social media postings, your electronic files, your emails, your videos. That is part of EIR. And then the 4th bucket is kind of the oddball. If we select a vendor that we either purchase any of these from them or we hire them to customize or design something in one of these other buckets, that's EIR. So if I am in an agency and I hire company ABC to create me a website, that's EIR, right? If you hire someone to update your login portal, that's EIR, and that vendor is required to be accessible. Now, I very specifically used the word select because I did not want to use the word pays or hires, because sometimes an agency or an institution will enter into a revenue generating agreement with a vendor. So let's say UT Arlington, we select the graduation photographer, the official photographer. We're not paying them. It's a revenue generating situation where we get a percentage, right? But UTA is saying, hey, students, graduates, if you want your official photographs, you have to go to this vendor's website to order your pictures. So we have an obligation to ensure that that website is accessible. All right. Any questions about how I'm defining electronic and information resources?
I have a question, Laura. This is Marie. So how I'm trying to understand the connection between defining electronic and information resources and then bringing the vendor into that definition, because the vendor is a separate entity.
But if we hire a vendor to update our login portal for MyMath, we have to ensure that the work done by that vendor meets our accessibility requirements.
Okay, so maybe that section then, since we're not talking about products or websites, would be more like services, like development services, bespoke services. Okay.
Exactly. And I should
regardless of the vendor. Yeah.
That's right. That's right.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, I wanted to talk just a second about exemptions versus exceptions. Let's talk about exemptions first, okay? Section 508 has an exemption for assistive technology resources. For instance, if you use the JAWS screen reader or you're going to buy JAWS for someone to use, that does not have to pass the EIR accessibility requirements because it is assistive technology. It has a specific purpose to assist a specific population of disabled people. So that is exempt. TAC, Texas Administrative Code, allows DIR to maintain a list of things that are exempt. When you're reading the TAC and it refers to the department, that means DIR. That's a very important concept to grasp because for the longest time when I was reading the department, I thought it meant me, my department, and it does not. It's DIR. So DIR has an item that is exempt. It's GIS software. So if you're going to purchase GIS software, you do not have to worry about the EIR accessibility review unless you want to. It's not mandated by law. TAC 21333 does have a limited exemption for hardware that is in monitoring spaces. Go look at it. There's a few more requirements, like it's occasionally viewed by repair people. So there are some qualifiers there. So look at that exemption. And just remember that you and I, not Marie, but the rest of us, we don't get to make exemptions. All right. Only DIR can make an exemption. The way a campus handles using something that's not accessible is through an exception. And the TAC tells you what has to be included on your exception paperwork. So I've got both TACs listed here, one for higher ed and one for everyone else. It's in the TAC that you have to have certain information included on your exception form. And that exception form must be signed by either the head of your agency or someone that has been officially delegated authority by the head of your agency. And I would encourage all of you to look at the procurement rule. It's either 213.18 or 38, again, higher ed versus everyone else. This particular section is something I'm still trying to wrap my head around because it is involving EIR purchases that cost over $500,000. It's going to take a year or longer to reach operational status. It involves more than one state agency, or it alters work methods of agency personnel. So that's something, if you haven't reviewed, I would encourage you to, because it is a little bit more involved than just our typical, oh, we're going to review this EIR for accessibility. All right, I'm going to pause for a moment Any questions?
Yes, Lisa Cade has a question. So on your prior slide, when you were defining EIR, did you mention hardware in there? Because there are some hardware items that we procure, like telephones, things like that, that need to also fall into that definition.
Right, I did not. Hardware is something that we are handling here at UT Arlington through a different channel, so I apologize that I didn't update my slide for this presentation. But yes, hardware is part of EIR, so I sincerely apologize for that oversight on my part.
And I'm about to, if I can get my computer to work, I'm updating TAC 206, and I have an updated definition of EIR that DIR is proposing for the TAC update. So I'll put that in the chat as well.
Okay, thank you. I think we may have someone waiting in the lobby.
Oh, sorry about that.
Okay. Okay, so who is responsible? You are. I am. If you send emails, you're responsible. If you share PowerPoint files, Word files, if you're purchasing software, if you're purchasing vendor services, if you're purchasing computers, telephones, just like Marie said a second ago, you are responsible. So every agency has to figure out, how are we going to receive requests from our agencies internally for review? How are we going to document our exceptions? You've got to have a plan. So what I can share with you today is how we're handling it here at UT Arlington. Now, I mentioned just a second ago that hardware is not part of this system. The way we are handling hardware reviews is I am reviewing purchase orders dispatched. On a weekly basis, I look at every PO that's been dispatched to see if there's hardware that needs to be reviewed. And I look at the Pro Card charges at the end of every cycle when we get the Pro Card report. I will tell you that our hardware review is not a mature process. We are still trying to get it up to speed. When you look at Section 508 and it defines hardware, it includes keyboards. Now, just like I'm sure all of you, we do not have the bandwidth to review everyone that wants to buy a keyboard. We can't exempt it, right? Because agencies can't make exemptions. But what we can do is a blanket exception form, saying that we believe this to be low risk because they are low dollar value. People are generally allowed to make the selection for themselves of what keyboard best suits their needs, no matter if they have a disability or not. So that's how we're handling things like keyboards. When I ask for a VPAT or an ACR, sometimes vendors will tell me, oh, we're exempt. No, you're not. And you may have some letter from Section 508 saying you're exempt, but I've never seen a letter from DIR telling a vendor they're exempt. So, and even if a vendor claims they're exempt, you aren't exempt. State agencies aren't exempt from TAC. So we have to either show that it's accessible or process our exception paperwork. I kind of got off on a tangent there, so I'm going to pull it back to how we're handling our 4 buckets here at UT Arlington. So for websites, we use the Site Improve tool. We are paying, I believe it's $30,000 a year to crawl 40,000 pages. Now, 40,000 pages isn't enough. We are hitting that cap, bumping up against it most months, but we've had to exclude large portions of our web presence to stay under that cap. So tens of thousands of pages from our library are not being scanned. Tens of thousands of pages from our athletics department are not being scanned. And we know they're not accessible. We have every baseball stat since the beginning of time out there on the internet, and it's not accessible. But I don't have the budget to continually crawl all those pages when we know that it's not going to be remediated. So we've had to make some strategic choices about what are we going to scan and report on. And then I continue to have conversations with those departments about, hey, you know, you've got this out there. It's not accessible. We need a plan. How are we going to get it there? Digital collections for the libraries are an extremely difficult thing to address. UTA received a collection from, I believe, the last name was Hulme, Hulme. It's a cartoonist. And it's over 8,000 web pages, but there's no alt text. I mean, it's not accessible, but it's going to take years, literally years, to get the alt text added. And that's once they get started. So it's a problem. But the good news is we know it's a problem versus just being ignorant. There are lots of web crawlers out there. And I would encourage you to put in your chat window the vendors that you use. I know some people use Moncito. There's lots of like Chrome extension inspecting tools you can use. IBM has a good one. There's a Wave is a good one. So there are tools out there, but like in the case of SiteImprove, it will tell you if you have a page with a video on it, but it takes a human to look at it to indicate whether or not it's captioned accurately, right? Whether or not it has the needed audio descriptions, those kinds of things. So it's never all going to be automated. There's always going to have to be a human looking at it to figure out, is there logical reading order? Is there sufficient color contrast? That kind of thing. Here at UTA, we handle the other buckets through a ServiceNow ticketing system. So I want to talk just a second more about web pages. So we have a web standards policy and procedure here at UTA. I assume that you probably have one at your agency also. I report quarterly to leadership on how we're doing. And when I started, we were crawling 30 sites. Now we're crawling 315. And even with that huge increase in the number of sites we're inspecting, our accessibility score is getting better. It's unfortunate that with SiteImprove, to reach compliance, which should be the floor, right? It's not the ceiling, it's the floor. To reach compliance, your score in SiteImprove has to be about a 96. It's not black and white, there's some finesse to it. So while 89 is great and certainly better than 67, it's still not at compliance. We do have some colleges that have reached compliance. College of Engineering led the way, College of Business, College of Social Work. So we are making progress, documented real progress, but we do have a ways to go. Because I know we do have some people on the call from other higher ed institutions. SiteImprove does not include Canvas because Canvas is against a firewall and we are not currently allowing SiteImprove access behind our firewall. So we use the Blackboard Ally tool inside Canvas to provide accessibility reports. So every time a faculty member uploads a piece of content, they get an indicator whether or not that content is accessible. Okay, the way we handle ServiceNow requests, when the employee, we don't accept requests from students, when the employee, be it faculty or staff, wants to use a, let's say, SurveyMonkey, they are supposed to go to ServiceNow and submit a ticket. Now, if they don't, if it's a purchase service, ideally I would catch it on their Pro card that they didn't put in the TAPREC. Or if it's an email that shows up in my inbox because it went to all employees, then I'll call them on it and say, hey, you've got to put in your ServiceNow TAPREC. TAPREC stands for Technology Approval Process Request. Now here at UT Arlington, we have a pre-approved list. Do not confuse this with an exemption list, because as you know, only DIR can approve an exemption. So the way I handle this is once a year, my team goes through the pre-approved list and we document based on a completed VPAT that this is an accessible resource, or We do our exception paperwork. Everything that's an enterprise license, we put on the pre-approved list. We do not want every department to have to go in and put in a request for Microsoft Word. Right? That doesn't make any sense. So we do that for them. Once a year, we document all of the items on the pre-approved list. And if it has to be approved under an exception, we do that exception paperwork. Now, when our employees submit this ticket in ServiceNow, it assigns approvals and tasks. So a single TAPREC is approved by 3 different teams. EIR accessibility is only 1/3 of the approval process. One approval goes to the Information Security Office. So they're looking at, is it this in the cloud? Does it touch confidential or controlled information? Does it have the text ramp certification? That kind of thing. Enterprise architecture also looks at it. They want to know if it's going to require single sign-on, if there's going to be help desk support, that kind of thing. So our campus gets to put in one request. Once all 3 teams independently approve it, then there's an email generated that they can use as approval to move forward with their use. I didn't say purchase, I said use. Marie, let me pause for just a moment. Any questions?
Yes, and it's on the prior slide when you were discussing web scanning. The question is, do you document manual testing for your website?
Do I document it? We had a major move from Cascade to Sitecore, where our main websites are in the process of moving to Sitecore. And we did do documented user testing on those templates. But the only other documentation I can provide is in SiteImprove when it's like video and it says, hey, does this video have captions? You actually tell the tool yes or no. And then it says, are they accurate? And you say yes or no. So that is documented that I made that response. And I believe I could even provide you a report with date and time. But that is the only documentation that I keep.
So I have a follow-up question to that. Maybe in a more generalized sense, is there a checklist for manual testing that you use when you're taking an approach to testing your website? Do you kind of have a checklist of things that you know are potential issues and you kind of go down that list and test against that?
So in SiteImprove, you're able to go to a list of criteria and they indicate which ones can be automatically checked and which ones must be assessed by a human. So that is a list that we use. I can tell you if I go to a new website and let's say I don't have the crawl yet from SiteImprove, I don't have the report. There are certain items that I look at first. First thing, color contrast, right? Our use of color as a single identifier. 8.5% of the US adult population has some type of color blindness. That's a large percent of the population. We want to not run into issues with that. So that's the first thing I look for. Second is visible focus. As you tab through the page, is it going in logical order? Can you see like a highlight box where you are on the page? And alt text. I inspect the images to ensure that there's alt text and then it's logical alt text. Did that answer your question?
Yes, Laura, thank you.
Okay, so here at UT Arlington, when we get a TAPREC for our review, these are our steps. We try to get a completed VPAT. When it's online and it's current, that's great because that's going to make our job easy. If not, we ask for one. Now, sometimes the vendor says, we don't know what that is. So we have the conversation with them. We'd like you to fill this out, right? Even if it does not support, well, that's the documentation we need for our exception, right? So we really want the vendor to give us a completed VPAT. If we can't get one, or if we grade it. And our grading system has evolved. When I first created a grading system, we graded on a scale from 0 to 5. And basically, we just counted how many responses were supported, partially supports, does not support, and then gave them a number. Now our grading scale is on a 0 to 11,000. I know it's a weird number. I'm sorry, but I worked with a student worker that I had who was blind and some other users in our community. And even though we know all of the WCAG criteria are important, we understand that they are all important. We did want to give weight to some of the criteria over others. So we actually identified 3 categories, what we call standard, somewhat important, and extremely important. And so we have a weighted grading system now where if the score, I think it's 9,250, then we approve it. We will still tell the department, hey, you might encounter these issues that you would need to accommodate. But for the most part, if it's that good of a score, it's pretty decent. But if the VPAT fails or if we can't get one, we look to see if the resource is going to be purchased under a UT Arlington purchase order with our standard terms and conditions, because that contract includes an EIR accessibility warranty clause. And what that clause basically says is if we tell the vendor, hey, this is a problem, we need you to fix it, and if they don't, we get our money back. This next approval is, we call it qualified approval. It's very rarely used, and I don't use it unless I get permission from our legal affairs office. But we occasionally will purchase a resource for a qualified population. For instance, active duty police officers, right? Well, active duty police officers are not going to have blindness, deafness, that kind of thing. So this is a way for us to approve the TAP reg. We have updated our exception acronym from EAAP to EAE, EIR Accessibility Exception. So I'm now calling it an EAE, and I apologize, I didn't update the slide. If the request that we receive is being used by 50 or fewer employees and or 50 or fewer students, and it costs less than $25,000, I have an exception form signed by the president of the university that I can apply to that request. But if it's used by 51 people, or it costs more than $25,000, then we actually fill out an exception form with that department. And someone delegated authority from the president of the university must sign that exception form. So that is our exception process. Does anyone have questions, comments, want to tell us what they're doing for exceptions at their agency? Okay, we don't have much time, but I did want to highlight just a little bit about how do you know if your stuff is accessible, right? I think it's safe to say that almost everyone on this call generates Word documents, generates PowerPoint documents, sends emails, right? So it's important that you know, how do you find out if your stuff is accessible or not? Because you really need to check before you start sharing. So if you check and the document is not accessible, but you're going to share it anyway, then you need to put a note that says, hey, I'm sorry. If you run into any issues with this, if you would like an accommodation, please call me or email me or contact you, give them information. All of the Microsoft Office software resources have a way to check for accessibility. So if you're in a newer version of Word or on a Mac, all you have to do is click on the review button and then check accessibility. If you're on an older version of Word, you'll click on the file and then info, which is the first button in the left menu. And then down under inspect document, you will find the check accessibility button. So Either way, when you hit check accessibility, it's going to give you a report to the right-hand side of your document. Now, warnings. This goes back to what has to be manually checked, right? In Microsoft Word and PowerPoint and Excel, if it gives you a warning that you may have insufficient color contrast, you need to check it. I believe that 100% of the time in my experience, when it warned me that I might have an issue, I had an issue. Okay. These arrows, when they point to the right, the section's collapsed. If you just click on it, it will show you each of the 4 instances. You can click on them and it will take you straight to where you are in the page. I would like to pop out of presentation mode for just a moment to show you something. If you want to not have to worry about whether or not you have sufficient color contrast, you don't want to have to check to see if you have sufficient color contrast. If you have the default Microsoft colors that you're using, you haven't customized them. When you go to your color palette button, if you ignore the first column, because that's gray and you're not going to use gray on white, but if you will stay on the bottom row, you will be fine. You won't ever have to check it. But if you move up even 1 row, you're going to have to start checking them because about half of them will fail against white. Okay. All right. There's another check you need to do in Word, and that is, oh, I'm trying to get this moved, so sorry. You need to go to the View button and then click on the navigation pane, check that box, and then pick the second button. So what this will tell you, if you're typing a document like a policy or a procedure, it's something that has headings. You should see this outline with the proper indents, right? If these are all lined up to the left, that means you created fake headings instead of real headings. If you just go up to your format buttons and change the font and change the size and change the color, that's a fake heading. Visually, it looks like a heading, but it's not a real heading. So people using a screen reader don't get to navigate by the headings. You have to use your styles buttons. I am teaching 3 more classes this month, how to make an accessible Word document, an accessible PowerPoint document, and an accessible fillable PDF form. So if you don't already know how to use styles, I encourage you to either come to the class or watch the recording. All right, PowerPoint. You'll notice this still says Word. That's because I'm lazy. I use the same screenshots. It works exactly the same way. All right, you either are going to go review, check accessibility, or file info, inspect document, check accessibility. Just like in Word, the report will appear to the right of your slide. So PowerPoint accessibility is a little bit more involved than Word. You must use slide masters. You can never draw a text box or it won't be accessible. The other thing you have to be careful to do is set your reading order. So if this sounds foreign to you, come to the training class. All right, I will show you how to do it. None of this is brain surgery. All right, none of this is difficult. The difficult part is change, right? We're human. Change is hard. We know how to make a PowerPoint. We've done it for 30 years or 40 years, but you can do it. And I know you can because I did it. I did not know how to make an accessible PowerPoint when I took this position. And I paid for a lot of bad training, which I found very frustrating. So come to the training class. I'll show you how to do it. Won't be a problem. How to check a PDF for accessibility. Now you have to have Adobe Acrobat. This will not work in the Reader program. But you open your PDF and there will be a Tools tab next to your file, right? So you click on Tools The fourth section down, the last icon is the accessibility icon. So you click on that. It's going to bring up a menu to the right of your document. The fourth item will say accessibility check, and you click on that. A big pop-up window will show up. You click the button that says start checking. So in PDF, the accessibility report will appear to the left of your document. And just like in Word, these arrows point to the right, which shows that they're collapsed. But if you click on them, they will expand and they will show you specifically where the issues are. This is really important. Check your PDFs before you send them out. We really need to stop generating inaccessible PDFs. We need to stop sharing inaccessible PDFs. UT Arlington right now, we have about 8,000 PDFs on our 40,000 pages that are being reported in Site Improve that need to be remediated. That's a lot. We're making progress one at a time, but we're making progress, and you can too. If you don't know how to make an accessible PDF, come to the class. Give me a call. I'm glad to share what I know. All right, one last topic, email. We all send email, right? Your emails need to be accessible. This is an example of a very poor email. I have a graphic that has very important information, what room we're meeting in, that is not included in the text of the email. That's a no-no. I have insufficient color contrast. I am missing alt text on this image, and I'm using a poor font choice. We really want to use sans serif fonts, fonts that don't have tails. That's what's best for those who have reading difficulties like dyslexia. Arial, Helvetica, the block type fonts are the best. So be sure that you have a good font choice, that you have good color contrast, that any important text is actually typed out, not only in your graphic, and that your images all have alt text. All right, there's some resources in this file. My contact information is on this file, and I will take questions.
I don't see anything in the chat, so at this point, I guess folks can just unmute themselves and jump in with questions.
You're welcome, Lisa.
I just have a comment, Laura, and also to everyone else on this meeting invite. I just want to thank you for doing this for the community and the other trainings that are coming up. I'm excited for those as well. I really appreciate the effort that went into that, and I'm grateful to all of the support from the community for those who've attended. So thank you very much.
Welcome. I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording, but I will hang out here for a few minutes. If anyone has a question, I'm happy to talk to you.